So just a disclaimer, we've been talking for days, literally, so our voices are kind of, gone, so bear with us. But yeah, either way, thank you everyone for joining. We'll be talking today about Streamlining Success, which is a very funny name. We work at Stream, and we'll kind of chat about how we build some of our frameworks for our SDKs that now help us serve billions of users.
So, I'm Nash. I'm a member of the developer relations team here with Stream, and with me today is...
I'm Filip, and I'm the Android UI team lead. So, in terms of the agenda, again, we'll kind of go over what the idea of Stream is, or how we started our product, what was the initial thing that we built, how we pivoted that idea into some more complex use cases, what we kind of did with the market research, and all of that.
And since we are a startup, we'll be touching on how development in startups work, at least for us, because it's really different to traditional companies. And we'll also cover some of the lessons we've learned during that time.
Yeah, and we'll touch upon trailblazing with Compose, or one of our new SDKs, one of our opportunities that we had, which is build a new SDK in Jetpack Compose, an emerging technology, and we use that knowledge to then pivot the same kind of process, the same idea into multiple other SDKs.
And of course, when you're building an SDK, there's always some lessons learned in there. So we're going to talk about how we took those lessons and we turned it into a framework to build other SDKs.
Yeah, and finally we'll jump into the results, or what are some of the things that we are seeing from these new SDKs, kind of metrics, what kind of research we've done afterwards, and what we applied to all of our processes in the end. Okay, so let's start with the idea of Stream.
Well, with any company, you're always trying to solve a problem. So, what is the problem we are trying to solve? Well, to answer this, we need to time travel a little bit. We need to go back to 2013 when apps like Twitter and Facebook are coming onto the scene and are growing in popularity. At this time, there's a lot of apps that we call socially aware. Essentially, a user posts some content and people engage with it, whether it's a like, a retweet, a share, or something else. And to build these applications is really complex because there's a lot of data going around, there's a lot of information and really complex connections. So I can follow Filip. Filip can post a really funny cat meme, and we need a way for his followers to see that. Or if my colleague like Kimi engages with that and we want to show that she engaged with that content, we also need a way to propagate that to other users. And again, building this was really difficult. There's a lot of behind-the-scenes concepts and technologies and nuances going on that is really hard to just get right. For companies, that means if you're trying to build this, sometimes there are edge cases you just don't cover, or there are bugs that show up in production because you've missed it during testing. So Stream co-founders decided to build a framework to explore this, and that's how our first product, Activity Feeds, was born. So, the name feeds sounds really abstract, right? Well, you can think of a feed as essentially a list of activities. So basically, if we post some content, whether it's some text or an image, you can consider that an activity. People can follow these feeds or channels to interact or view the content from other users. And using this model, it's really easy to create very complex connections between users and activities on the system. But we know, everyone here, we're all engineers, we like building really complex applications. So, chances are you have more than one type of feed in your application. And you need a simple way to control the settings across all of those feeds. And for that, you can group all of these together, and you can apply some base configuration across all of your channels. So you don't really have to go in and think about it too much.
Yeah, to sum it up, feeds are essentially like Reddit, Facebook, Twitter, all these applications that allow you to produce content, allow your users to produce something as well, connect between each other, create more complex structures. And that's kind of what we had imagined for feeds because, again, that was the market at the time, and everyone was kind of trying to build these applications, and we did it for you. So what are some of the problems we solved along the way? There's actually two groups of problems, or two categories, let's say. The first is the sheer complexity. All of these applications are immensely complex. There are limitless integrations and limitless ways users can interact with the content. So you kind of have to think about that. And it's really hard to nail these applications. If you think about, some of the examples as I mentioned, Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, they're really popular and really big. But there are probably like 100 more, thousands more applications that someone tried to build, and it didn't really work out in the end. So building these is really complex, scaling them is even more complex, and in the end, it's very expensive. You can spend months, maybe years building a product like this, and hundreds of thousands of dollars or more, depending on where you live, and it might not pan out in the end.
So adding to that, the infrastructure needs to be really fast. But most importantly of all, it needs to be stable and it needs to be secure. When you're dealing with user information, people expect a level of privacy with their data. And that's like a core consideration when you're building a service like this. So there's a lot of like complex questions and use cases that we need to solve here. But we managed to do it.
Yeah, we nailed activity feeds. We released the product. We got a lot of customers. There's plenty of really big companies that use us, and we keep on growing in that area. But again, as a startup, you have to be thinking about what's next, what's the next project you want to build. How do you get this idea? Like, where do you look? And
well, we decided to look no further than our existing customers to see what are the use cases they're trying to build with feeds. And it's the typical saying, right? It's not a bug, it's a feature. So people were trying to build chat with activity feeds. And we looked at ourselves internally and we were like, we didn't really build activity feeds for that, so let's try doing something a little better. Let's optimize this a little bit. And that is how we decided to build our first chat SDK. And we had the same idea for chat as we did with activity feeds. Build a system that is robust, scalable, and powerful for developers to just drop into their applications. You can plug in all of our different channels, messaging systems, input fields, without having to worry too much about that backend connection. Essentially, we want to make it plug and play. So we built a bunch of UI SDKs across technologies that developers know and love. So whether you're on web, think Angular and React, Compose or Flutter, or even gaming, we created some SDKs that connect automatically to our backend. So as a developer, you can just grab our SDK, drop it in, and don't really have to think too much or work too hard to get your MVP up.
Yeah, so what did we actually build for you? First and foremost, all of our components, all of our UI, and just in general, SDKs, are event-driven, and they work in real time. This means you can receive events for, obviously new messages when it comes to chat, people leaving or entering your channels, typing updates from other users, and so on and so forth. So everything is event-driven, and it works by default, but you can also tap into that to expand the behavior. So you can provide custom handlers, obviously, for events, and kind of add some extra experience to your application. So it's not just what we give you, and that's about it. On top of that, we provide offline caching support for some of our select SDKs that relies on retry and synchronization logic. This means that you can kind of send things offline, or if you have a spotty connection and something goes wrong, you can retry the message. And in the end, if it doesn't work out, if there's just no connection at all, or you're just having a really bad day with your phone or your network, you can synchronize these messages as soon as you go online. So nothing is really lost in that sense. We do the sync for you, and everything is replayed. And like any chat use case, any chat application, you want push notifications. So we have that built for you as well. And not only that, but we have some extra providers for you. So we have the default implementation for notifications, like on Android. Since most of people here are Android, I imagine, we have Google Play services and all of that, so through Firebase. But if you're looking to cover some markets that are not using those providers, like if you're looking for Xiaomi or Huawei, we have you covered there as well. And even if that is not enough, again, you can provide your own handler and your own logic for the notification system and just kind of do what you want.
Of course, users today expect a rich UI experience. And that doesn't always have to be UI in terms of looking pretty. It also means under the hood features. So if you, as a developer, drop in a message list to your application, you shouldn't really have to think about it being performant or not, or you shouldn't really have to think about optimizing that. We want to take all of that hard work and do it for you. Of course, with anything in chat, people love to send attachments. So if you're sending some pictures or adding some reactions, we want to make sure that we make that process as simple as possible for you. And of course, if you want to do something more complex, like sharing live location to a friend and build that into your app as a custom attachment, we provide handlers to make it easy for you to customize according to your use cases. And of course, everyone here uses Slack, right? We're all big on Slack. For better or for worse, we also support threads and quoted replies so you can have your flavor of catching up on longer conversations. So being a developer product, there's a few things that we always try to strive for, and that is making it as easy as possible and as, making it as easy as possible for you to just get started and just start customizing to your heart's content. Of course, the front end is only half of the story, right? So to supercharge your front end, developers can take advantage of our backend API to integrate complementary services. So whether you're connecting to Firebase Auth or a bespoke API, our server-side SDKs allow you to supercharge your applications to fit your custom needs. And of course, we want to make sure, again, that we meet developers where they are. We provide SDKs for whatever language or frameworks that they are comfortable using. So if you're a TypeScript developer or JavaScript developer, or you code at 2 a.m. in Rust, we have an SDK just for you.
Talking back about the backend infrastructure, so all of these clients connect to our backend, and what do you actually get from our backend? Well, first off, we scale to millions of users. In fact, we can scale upwards of 5 million of users chatting or communicating in a singular channel at the same time. So that is enough to cover all the major use cases, maybe even the largest ones. We're very reliable, and our availability is really, really good. So 99.9999 all that percent, you can make, we'll make sure that our service is up and running, and you don't have to worry about it going down in case of really crisis moments where you're like launching your application or a sudden surge of new users. We have low latency on our backend as well because we have this thing called the edge infrastructure. It's a smart way of saying we have strategically placed servers all around the globe. So they make sure that all the information, all the responses are there for you in low latency. And when we say low, we mean 5 milliseconds average. So it's super fast. It's purely real time, and you don't have to worry about some information, kind of hanging there or something like that. When it comes to storage, again, we store all of your messages out of the box, and we don't charge for that. So we have unlimited message storage for pretty much anything that you send, all the regular text messages and everything like that. And we store all your files and images on our CDN. So we have this solution for you. You don't have to really worry about it. But if you do want to add some extra overview to the process of uploading, processing images, or adding extra information to them, like adding extra metadata, you can provide your own custom CDN as well. So you can kind of tap into that experience and do something else.
So essentially what Filip is saying is our backend is magic. So whether you're trying to integrate services or upload a bunch of cat pictures to our CDN for your users across like a distributed edge network, we try to make that as simple as possible without you really having to think about it.
Yeah, cats and dogs, because dogs are awesome as well. So it's not just magic, it's also very secure. We comply to all the major organizations, all the major certificates of security and just, in general privacy. So you can build for social, which is kind of the standard, the most common use case. But because we comply to HIPAA, you can also build for healthcare, and you don't have to worry about the information being lost or leaked or anything like that, or just inaccessible to users in case you're building for use cases like GDPR or the California or whichever state you're in, all the legislations that are out there.
So with all of these amazing features and compliances, this has to be really expensive, right? Well, our answer to this is no. We have a 30-day free trial that you can sign up, get full feature access. You don't need a credit card. But for all of you individual developers here or smaller companies, if you want free lifetime access, you can apply to our Maker account, which is great for individual teams, smaller users. It obviously has some usage caps, but no surprise bills at the end of the month. So you could put in your credit card in there, and you wouldn't be charged, $1,000 overnight. So if anyone is interested, if your team meets these requirements, you can sign up.
Yeah, and you can have indefinite access, as we mentioned, so you don't have to worry about ever losing this privilege as long as you meet those requirements, which are pretty generous, I think. Yeah, let's go back to startups. And since we are a startup, we have some special things happen in this world, like this environment, this ecosystem. And even though it's like a meme in general that startups have a lot of crunch time and you're working like 60, 70, 80 hours a week, something like that. If you do that, please don't. But in general, it's not like that at Stream. We're actually pretty chill. However, we do still need things fast. So being a startup, being a business in this sense, we need to jump on things as quickly as possible because we can't really plan everything ahead of time. And this has kind of two ways of what we mean. So first off, we can plan the technology changes and what's going to happen in the industry as easily as possible. So when we see something new that's coming up, something that's emerging that the community is kind of clamoring for, we have to jump on it as soon as possible before it kind of becomes something that everyone uses and we're just like out of the curve. And also we need to be there first because we need the most experience, we need the most feedback from our users to just improve our product. So it's really important for us to breach that market and kind of cater to our users as much as we can.
Yeah, and adding to what Filip mentioned, whenever you build a product, it's rare for it to just remain stagnant. You don't ever ship a product and not change it over time. So with API products or SDKs, you might be thinking, it's easy to add code changes, right? Like if I want to change something, I'll just tweak the code, add a line, maybe add a function. But again, for APIs and SDKs, those code changes could have unintended consequences. If you add some code, it breaks something and you need to remove that, if it affects the public API, well then you're breaking your SDK for your developers and possibly millions of end users. So that's like a key consideration that we need to keep in mind. We can't just go in there and add some code. We need to be really deliberate and really plan out how we're going to affect the API, how we're going to add features to our code base. And of course, we're not perfect. We make mistakes all the time. So it's important when you make these mistakes to sit down with your team, do a post-mortem, understand what went wrong, and try to do our best to avoid repeating them.
Yeah, so you said ship once and never change. Is that like an iPhone? Yeah, so going back to SDK development, again, we're a startup that builds SDK. So there's a whole different environment for that. So first off, we need to be really careful about those breaking changes. Again, if you ship some code and then it ends up not working properly, you have to fix something. It can affect billions of people in our use case. So if we have like a UI bug or something that visually doesn't really work well, then we end up with a lot of unhappy users. Furthermore, it's really hard to build trust if you change things often or if you change things in a way that forces your users to kind of adapt, to change something, to do extra work themselves. Everyone kind of just wants that plug and play feeling. So because of this, we are very public and open source. All of our SDKs are open source on GitHub, and you can just browse through them. You can see what's going on. But we also have a few public applications for each of our SDKs where you can just check out what we're building, how it works. If there's like a specific custom feature that we built for you, so you can draw some inspiration from, or just copy and paste code. It's all out there and available for you.
So what did we realize in the early days of building SDKs? So we initially started our chat product with a couple things: a backend, a web implementation, and a couple of native solutions. We didn't cover everything at once because, as a startup just entering the market, we didn't know what the customer base was going to be or if this is something that was going to pay out in the long run or not. But after some time, the one thing that we did realize is that we need a system or a way to build our new products based on the experience and feedback that we got up to that point. Essentially, we had to ask ourselves, how can we make sure our future products or future SDKs are consistently good? Because we do not want to compromise on quality.
And we had our opportunity with Compose. So Jetpack Compose was an emerging technology for, since last year, I guess early last year, and also a bit before that. But not too many people were using it. And because of this emerging technology, it was a really good UI toolkit for Android as compared to XML and Vue. So we wanted to use that to build something new, to cover new ground, and just kind of use the knowledge we gained so far, or through that process, to expand on our other SDKs. So the core premise between the Compose SDK had 3 points. We wanted to build everything from scratch with Compose and for Compose. So we had an Android SDK that was already out there. It had a lot of users, a lot of customers. It was really good. It was very polished. But at the same time, we didn't want to reuse that completely. We didn't want to just kind of plug in the Android UI into Compose and call it quits. We actually wanted to go from scratch and build everything again. Because Compose offers us really new features and a new approach for building UI on Android, and even compared to some other SDKs. So what we did was we took a look at all of our SDKs we had built up to that point. So React Native, Flutter, iOS and Android natively or in their legacy toolkits, let's say, web as well. We stole all of the amazing, awesome features, like all the best things from those SDKs, similar to how Kotlin stole everything from all the other languages. And we use that to make Compose, or just make it a bit ahead or something like that. So we wanted to push an extra mile to see what we can do, to make it more flexible and customizable. And in the end, we wanted to provide enough documentation and just kind of a good set of resources. As anything that lives in the open source, we need a good tutorial for people to try it out. We need like ways to get some feedback. We had some sample apps built as well. As you can see on the screen, this is one of our sample apps. So we just wanted to have these things out there for any customer, any user that might want to draw inspiration from, or anyone who's looking to learn Compose and just kind of use our SDK as a baseline.
Yeah, like with Compose, we knew that we were on to something special. Like it opened up new areas for us for customization, performance, personalization, in a way that we didn't really have with our traditional UI toolkits and frameworks. But at the same time, we wanted to ship an MVP. Is that traditional problem? You want to ship something fast, get some feedback, and understand what people expect. And at the time, with Compose, this was really difficult because there weren't many people familiar with Compose at the time we were building it. So what that meant was there was no best practices out there, not too many guidelines on the format or design of an API. So essentially, we kind of had to sit down and try to figure this out. So we built something, we would try it ourselves, integrate it. How does the API work? What does that ergonomic feel like? And if it's not the right approach, we'd go back and we'd try again until we eventually found an API that worked pretty good.
Yeah, so when it comes to the Compose SDK timeline and what we had imagined was going to happen in 2021, I think. Years are just passing by. So we wanted to build an initial release of the SDK. Oh, I can actually use my pointer. Yeah, so we wanted to build a first iteration and then focus on reusability for 4 weeks in total, just to get something done to see how our components are going to work in our customers' favor. So in terms of reusability, again, in terms of customization, and just being able to build those complex use cases our customers really need. Then we would focus for a couple of months on an MVP, as Nash mentioned, ship something out and continuously improve based on the feedback and polishing, the feedback that we got from our users so we can use that for polishing. We had expected Compose would come out as 1.0 or stable by the end of the year. No one really kind of knew because there weren't really big announcements about Compose, like what's going to happen. There were a lot of things being built simultaneously, so we didn't really know. And as life happens and everything in life, this turned out to be the case. So instead of being released sometime at the end of the year, as most of the community had imagined, I would say, Compose released as 1.0 at the end of July, which gave us just a couple of months when I kind of joined to build the Compose SDK. So we didn't really change the initial part. We didn't really change the initial part of iteration and polishing. We did that with some intensive approach. So like we really tried to build several applications like clones, like Twitch, Slack, and some others, to make sure that we can cover those use cases with our SDK. We released at the end of July with Compose 1.0 as a beta SDK. That's something that we learned from Google. You can just kind of put the beta tag and things are fine. So we looked for feedback, we looked for polishing to make sure that we are kind of polished by the end of the year, and we can add some of our features that some of our other SDKs had. So we wanted to be feature complete by the end of the year in this timeline, instead of kind of having an initial release that has everything and then slowly polishing it up.
In the end, we managed to ship our SDK on day 1 of Compose being stable. For our initial release, we were able to provide like a lot of customization options, as well as detailed documentation and information about the project. And the best part of it all, we managed to do this all open source, free on GitHub for users to check out and contribute to. That said, with a change in the timeline, there were some things we had to pivot in our approach.
Yeah, so instead of having almost a year or like half a year to build something, we just had a couple of months. The initial thing that we changed is that we didn't build too many features for our SDK. So again, our Android SDK, previous Android, so like XML, the one that we have so far, and some of our other SDKs have been there for years, and they have a lot of features that were slowly being added through feature requests from our customers. Because Compose was a new SDK, we didn't really have initial customers, obviously. We didn't know which of these customers will shift over. We didn't know if the current API, the current set of features that we have will cover all of the things that our customers need, but we kind of expected that it will. So we didn't want to build everything and kind of have it half working. We wanted to focus on stability and just make sure that the SDK works in what it should, so like in the core parts of it. We also kind of limited or let's say made a lighter level of customization, so we didn't go as deep. We provided obviously the theming options and everything like that you would want in a chat SDK or an UI SDK in general to make sure that the branding of your company is represented. So we had all of that. We also had a lot of options for replacing parts of the UI, for custom handling and all of that. But we still refrained from adding absolutely everything because again, it could be overhead and we were not sure if our customers will need to use that. We did focus on guides and examples, however. So we had alternative versions of our components in the Android SDK and some others. And instead of doing that for Compose to add more overhead to the SDK, we wanted to build guides that were actually going to show the users how to build something custom, how to build something that's very common. So this is an approach that we kind of use for our new SDKs as well. So it's much better to build a guide how to build X than to build X and have only like 2% of the people use it. And we wanted to ramp up the development internally. This was actually a huge shift. We were initially looking to hire like 2 or 3 people for the Compose team after the initial setup. But in the end, we decided not to go that route. We actually kind of stole people from the XML SDK, so to say, so they can apply all the experience they got from XML or the Vue toolkit and just dealing with customers through years to Compose, and also to learn Compose so they can kind of apply the approach, the declarative approach, mindset of Compose back to XML wherever possible.
So all of that said, the most important thing was we were able to get the SDK out. And as you might have guessed from that timeline, we still had a lot of features that we were just eager to build. But as soon as the SDK went out, we started getting customers, trial signups, people testing it out, and leaving their feedback on GitHub, which was super, super helpful for us. Because now all of the code that we've been writing internally and all of the sample apps that we've been building to try our SDK, we can actually get some meaningful feedback from developers to see if we actually got it right. And in some cases, we actually did, and in others, we still had some things to improve. But the questions still remain. How do we replicate this approach, or how do we create a process from this to build future SDKs in a relatively short period of time? So shortly after the release of Compose, we sat down internally, got a cup of coffee, and we said, all right, how do we go about creating a framework for us to build SDKs? And with any framework, you usually have a set of principles or guidelines that you want to lay out as like the base to build upon. And for us, we came up with 5 things we call like our product philosophy. And that is putting our developer experience first. People using our SDKs are developers. And I'm sure like many of you in here, if you pull a library, you don't want to have to go fiddle around to find API documentation and guides and all of that. We want to make sure that we create all of those things and we embed it into our SDK in a way that is easy to find and easy for people to just get started. The next one is focusing on people. We want to talk to our users. We want to actively pursue feedbacks and get improvements based on their feedback. Whenever we can, we take the first step here to gauge how we can help them. Always build something that people want to use, essentially.
Yeah, and that kind of covers into the next point, which is extensive features. Again, we wanted to spread our SDK, like expand it a bit more, add more features, add more customization options, and so on, but based on the people's needs. Because again, why would you build something that no one actually needs? You're just spending time doing something that is kind of useless for the time being, at least. We also wanted to be very lean with the timeline. From the Compose example, as you've seen, we had to cut down on our time for developing the SDK by a lot. And it just makes sense for us for the future SDKs to do the same. So to kind of make sure that we go optimistically in it, or maybe pessimistically, I guess, how you look at it, to just have a very short timeline and do something in that sense, and then pivot and iterate if need be. And finally, all the things that we learned through the process of building Compose and some of our future SDKs that we'll mention in a moment, we use for internal alignment. So anything that was new, that was like a revelation, the aha moment for us, for our new SDKs, was backported to old SDKs. So if we could improve something, if we could make sure that our legacy or first-gen SDKs work better, we did that. And if we were building something new in those first-gen SDKs that kind of have the baseline or like the structure available for it, then we would use that to make sure that those features end up in the new SDKs as well. So it's kind of like a back and forth.
And again, since the primary users of our products is developers, we want to give them an unforgettable experience. Not in a bad way, but in a really great way. And that is why the team focused a lot on writing extensive documentation for the code. Easy to follow guides for common use cases and requested integration. And most importantly of all, we strive to have a clear and consistent API, not just in Android, but across all of our SDKs. Because as a user or as a company, if you're integrating a service, chances are you're probably integrating in more than one platforms. And we want to make sure that when you're using that API, that things just make sense. You don't want to have one method name in Android, name something else in iOS, name something else in Flutter. We want to respect the platform idioms, but we also want to make sure that it is fun and intuitive for developers to use.
Yeah, and focusing on people, that actually means you can communicate with us through several different ways. We have these easy-to-access support channels, so you can message us through email. You can send us your requests if you have any kinds of questions. If you want to report issues, or just in general, if you're having trouble integrating the SDK, we're going to get back to you and just help you out. On top of that, you can reach to us via issues on Zendesk and GitHub. So we have like a customer support on Zendesk and through GitHub, because obviously all the SDKs are open source. If you're an enterprise customer, you can go a step further. We have a landline that you can call basically any time of the day and report your issues and just kind of get help. And if you want, you can integrate yourself or your channel into our workspace on Slack, where we can have direct communication with our customers, or sorry, with our engineers. So you can, we have our customers on Slack, and we can just kind of communicate with them. If there's anything that you might need, you can just ask. And if that's not enough, if you're just kind of looking for casual support every now and then, or you need someone to talk to, we have support notations for our engineers, where we actually prioritize support. So there's always one person at least from a given SDK, so let's say Android, Flutter, React Native, that is on support, that covers all the tickets. So if you have any kinds of questions, so again, via email, Slack, issues, whatever, we're going to reach out to you and we'll help you out, and we'll make sure that everything works on your end. And if that is not enough, it sounds like a Topshop commercial, then you can just have direct integration meetings with us. You can request a call with our engineers. You can request pair programming sessions as well. We can just jump in with you, kind of code away, fix your issues, or kind of help you resolve the issues to some degree. Or if you have any kinds of questions, how would you go about building X, or is there anything that we should be mindful of when building Y, and so on and so forth. And to show you how open we are in terms of open source, actually on Android we have this project on GitHub, or two projects. So we have the Android UI team planning and the Android core team plannings, where you can kind of take a look at all the issues that we have open, everything that's available online. So if you open an issue, you don't have to worry about it being lost. You can actually track it here to see what's going on, who is working on it, What's the progress? Like, is it blocked by something else, perhaps, or is this like a deeper issue that's like a product issue or something like that, where you have to make a decision? Again, you don't have to worry about losing track of something you reported. It's always going to be up there, and you can kind of follow along.
Now, when you're building extensive features, there's, of course, a lot of considerations you need to have. The first one is obviously we need to be on like par with the timeline. We're trying to build fast here. We're trying to get this out and start getting some feedback. So as much as we love building awesome features, we need to sit down and really think about like what are the most impactful features for our initial release. And our guiding principle here is to focus or basically ask ourselves, what is a core feature that people expect their SDKs to have? And what is a nice feature we can add in a future update or in an iteration? So we always ask ourselves, like, what do you care most about in your chat SDK? What are some features that users just can't live without? We spend a lot of time on this feature like discovery journey just to make sure that we're getting it right. And when we have our list of first, set of core features, we pass it to various stakeholders to get some feedback, to refine it even more, and make sure that we're really shipping the most impactful MVP features. In the end, our philosophy is to prioritize shipping a core set of features with iterations, feature improvements, and additions after release. Because for us, with developers using our product, it's important for us to ship something that is relatively stable, with a slimmed down feature set, rather than shipping something that's bloated with a lot of flashy features that barely work.
Kind of like Samsung. So being mindful of the timeline, again, we need to make sure that everything works correctly, that we have enough time to build what we need, as Nash mentioned, all the core things. And I kind of hate to say it, but we need to be as agile as possible. So yeah, we need to make sure that we're flexible enough, that we can adapt to the timeline, that we can adapt to the amount of things that we want to build, we can adapt to the environment. And this is especially true with end-user products. So again, everything that we're building is customer-facing. If we don't build something correctly, a lot of our customers will be unhappy. If they're unhappy, they're unlikely to continue working with us or continue to upgrade to newer versions where we might have fixed that. So again, it's easier to pivot if you're early on in your release cycle or early on in your versioning. So for Compose, for example, if we were in like 0.10 or something like that, let's say like the beta versions, then we can easily ship and change things without users complaining too much, as we're still exploring the ground. As soon as you launch that 1.0 or any other major version, it is a major version, which usually means major changes. So users are kind of unlikely to update, even if you fix everything, you release a new version that is 50% faster than the old one. Still, there's going to be people who use something that's a year old. Or in our case, we had people using SDKs 3 years old. So another thing that you can kind of add or use from our experience is adding the beta tags to your SDKs. If you're building an SDK, it's a very good thing to add beta. So it might seem like something's not stable. It might seem like something is not well done yet. But beta can usually just mean we're exploring and we're not entirely sure if this is something that you would like to use. So give us some feedback, give us some information, and we'll see if this makes sense and if we need to pivot in this case. So again, for our Compose API, we had a few customers that came up to us and said, okay, we see that your SDK is beta, which is really good. We like it so far, but we want you to improve it even more, because then it will be amazing for us. And they gave us really detailed overview of what they would like to see, what kind of approaches they feel would be intuitive for them, and we used that and applied that to the Compose SDK, which gave us a lot of happy customers.
So with that in mind, it was really important for us to establish an internal process to align all of this with the various teams. Because what we realized is much easier to scale a well-established and polished project template than to run multiple variations at once. And with any cross-functional efforts, we realized that the entire team could benefit from some meetings: feature parity, naming and semantics, testing and stability. Essentially, we wanted to make sure that everyone was on the same page about our internal processes, and our external naming and API conventions were clear and consistent throughout the product.
Yeah, so this essentially means we get to delegate responsibilities. Again, instead of having one person build everything and just focus on everything all the time, we can use these meetings to talk about feature parity. So if something is not kind of correct or like different in different SDKs, we can delegate those to smaller work groups that effectively tackle these issues. And by delegating, we can cover more ground and we can have a faster paced environment. And we kind of kept saying, as developers, we don't really like meetings. We want as few as possible. We like our smooth workflows. And we kept saying, let's have another meeting, let's have another meeting and another one. And now we have just meetings. So in the end, we don't really do any coding anymore. We just kind of talk to each other and hope everything works out.
So now that we've gone over all of this, what do we have to show for it? Well, we're really happy that our planning and organization helped us to achieve some really great results. So first of all, building the new SDKs was essentially cut in half by having a single engineer and just focus on building the core set of features, no bloaty, bells and whistles. Just get the product to a point where it's usable and we can start getting feedback. That really helped us in terms of cutting our development time. Another really cool one was the adoption rates of our emerging SDKs were twice as fast to our first gen, which was really, really encouraging for us. And I think the most impactful, 10% of our customers already using them and giving us feedback, which again, it really helps for us to get that real world use case, that real world feedback to optimize the product. Because the reality is, as much as you test and you dog food internally, there's always going to be some use case that you just did not think about. And to start getting those real world feedbacks, it really goes a long way in making a great product.
Yeah, so Nash, I don't think we have any more time. So we have to kind of cut it, but we do have a lot of resources, so let me just kind of mention them here real quick. We will share the presentation and everything afterwards. You can follow, or you can take a screenshot right now. So we have GitHub, obviously, for all of our SDKs. We have extensive tutorials and documentation on our website. We have a blog post that covers technical use cases, case studies, and just kind of showcases, and as well as company rules and what's going on with the company. So if you want to check that out, feel free to visit us or visit us here at the booth, as we don't really have any time for questions. So yeah, thank you so much for joining today, and yeah, we'll see you around.
Thank you all.